That which you most need to find is found where you least want to look. Welcome to the Sought and Found podcast, your gateway to the world of holistic health and wellness.
Okay. I'm still not the best at asking questions, but I'm good at listening. So it's a journey. Welcome to the podcast, Mara. Thanks for being a guest. I actually was going through the films I did years ago, and I remember when we did the interview with you, it was so hard to cut up this hour-long interview into like a 5-minute film. So I thought it would be good to sit down with you and do a bit of a long format Q&A.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I really enjoyed when you were here in Chicago and we did the videos, and Adik and I have said many, many times that we wish that you lived here and could be our full-time videographer, because I still think those are some of the most beautiful interviews we've ever had shot.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a beautiful experience working with you guys. So I wanted to, I guess, introduce the theme, but before we speak about the theme, it might be worth defining some words to create a context about what the podcast will be about. So maybe from your view, how do you view the word principles and how would you define a principle?
Well, I think there's two definitions of the word. One is like a very personal, like a person's personal principles that they live by. It's like values that they've chosen, values that they've chosen to uphold. And then I think there's more of a kind of neutral, almost scientific definition that says it's like the basis of something, like the the principles of life, like what's required for life, oxygen, water, those would be basic principles. So there's kind of the personal and then the neutral or scientific. I'll link that would. And I think sometimes people can confuse that their personal are in the scientific and they're not, but that's a whole long conversation.
But then I think you also get into something like universal principles of something that maybe is a principle on the macrocosm and microcosm, on like the big and small levels in life. So I guess, I would really like to explore how you view the mind and thoughts. So maybe we can start with defining the mind, or at least trying.
Yes. No big deal. We'll just jump right in. Well, to your point, I think if something is universal, it will show up in the micro and the macro. And I think mind as a principle in the world is really fascinating and frankly impossible to define. So I'm not even going to pretend like I can nail that one. But I think that there's evidence everywhere that there's an intelligence behind life. So when I think of mind, I think of kind of a universal mind or almost a collective mind as this intelligence that's innate to the life force that, saw one of those videos of a shark that had been bit by another shark and just this massive gash, and they showed 27 days later it had completely healed. The shark was just doing its shark thing, swimming around in the water, and this enormous gaping gash that you would almost think might kill him ultimately healed itself. Because there's, and humans see this, and there's something in life that is intelligent and mindful, like it's somehow directing things toward homeostasis, healing, balance, regeneration. There's a lot of different words we can use, but to me it's like fascinating that is ever present in the universe, this life force, this intelligence. So when I think of mind, I think of that as the biggest definition of mind. Now, obviously, you and I have individual personalized experiences of that. We're a unique expression of that intelligence. And I can talk about, my personal Mara experience of mind. But I think to keep it at the most sort of broad, universal, that's what I think of it as, is like, there is this intelligent thing that's driving things in a direction, and you can spot it kind of anywhere in anything living.
Yeah, it's almost like we get in the way of that process sometimes, because that's kind of where, I mean, if you're looking at that definition of a bigger mind or entity or collective consciousness, it's like sometimes our own thoughts can be in the way of that process. And it's, I guess, leading to the next question is, how would you define thoughts?
Yeah, I think thoughts are more in that individual, personalized expression of that intelligence. It's like, okay, my body, has these cells and microorganisms that are like all commingling and interacting toward, like I said, in that direction of life. So there's all these processes going on inside of me, but then there's also this magical thing happening in my mind, which is that I have thought, which is how mind creates an energy and experience of existence for an individual human. And I obviously can't speak for other species. I can just share from my own point of reference, but it's like thought allows me to make sense of, connect to, and identify my place in the world. But to your point, I think
there's also like a weird relationship with thought. It's my thoughts. Like there's a relational component. I don't know if that's a word. There's a component of like the separation between the mind and thought. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, I think my kind of work and my life has shown me that thought is almost like this aperture. It sort of expands and contracts our mind so that we experience that greater intelligence with more freedom or more filtration. Like when I have a ton of thinking on my mind, when I'm feeling maybe very insecure or anxious or worried, or just have a lot on, like have a lot happening in my head, I don't feel particularly in tune with or connected to that broader mind, that intelligence behind life that we talked about a moment ago. I feel very in my own little Mara world, and it feels very little and kind of annoying, like a excuse me, but like a yippy dog that's like, she kind of just are like, shut up. So yeah, there is something about humans developing a relationship to that very beautiful, necessary, creative process called thought, but developing habits.
And you can't stop thoughts.
Yeah, you can't stop it. And I actually I have a 2 and a 4-year-old right now, and it's really magical to watch how they use thought, because it's so egoless right now. And I don't know, I'm fascinated. I don't understand, but like why at a certain age, it's almost like the ego.
Does the ego develop?
The ego lands. Like, and you can like, I can see it coming with my 4-year-old. It's like, it's on the horizon. It's starting to show up a little bit, but it's still not really there. And with my 2-year-old, it's not there at all. So their capacity,
I think,
thought is very free and fresh,
Yeah, there's I'm paraphrasing, but there's a quote by Carl Jung where it's something like the first half of life is about developing an ego and the second half is about dismantling it. But it is weird that there is like this age where it just sprouts all of a sudden.
Yeah. And you can't help it as a parent. You have this like desire to protect them from the ego. Be like, no, don't get an ego. Don't do it. Because then you end up like me and you have to spend the rest of your life tearing it apart. But that's like, I don't fully understand it, but I'm fascinated by it. It seems like an inevitable part of human existence that we get that, and then we wrestle with it, and then we come to some, hopefully, sort of more mature, enlightened relationship with it where it doesn't get in our way so much.
Yeah, but I think it's also got its uses and benefits, and I think over a lifetime there's many small and big ego deaths as your like sort of mind or soul evolves over time, you know?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so with thoughts, what do you think is the source of thoughts?
Yeah.
Do you think there's I think it's somewhat of a paradox where there's like a divine source and inspiration, and there's stuff that's clearly from your past and others and influence. So what is the different sources of thought?
It's funny that you said that because I almost had exactly that visual. It's like there's two wells, and I'm making
Yeah.
this up, but it feels in my life like there's two wells, and sometimes I'm drawing upon the past experience and cultural. It's very, very, I mean, it's amazing to me when you're privileged and fortunate enough to travel the world like you've done or I've done, and you just see how much of our thinking is so culturally influenced. Things that
Yeah.
we think are normal, you go to another culture and realize are so not normal, or vice versa. Like, it might feel very strange to you that people in another country think blah, 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 blah. So there's kind of this well of thought that I think is very in the material world. It comes from where our body happened to be born on this planet. It comes from the kind of parents we had. It comes from friends and society. And then also that more ego, like as we grow up and we have all of those social and cultural and familial influences, and then we, put our own personal spin on it. And so that's one well. It's like it's very in my individual Mara body, Mara experience, Mara past. And then there's this other well that I have definitely experienced drawing upon that feels very free from that. It feels like it's a broader, more universal or divine state of consciousness. It's like in a certain state of consciousness, you have access to very different kinds of thinking, and it doesn't feel like you. And actually, when I've really had profound experiences of drawing from that well, it almost feels completely not mine. Where I like in a very wonderful way, it feels foreign but mine at the same time.
I think, Stephen Pressfield speaks about that in The War of Art, where he speaks about like invoking the muse, or like the divine force and letting it channel through you. And I think most people can experience that at some stage in life where you're like, oh, I don't know, I could write that, or like something just flows out of you. And that's almost like when that idea is supposed to be born into the world.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's more of like a unfiltered proximity to that mind we talked about in the beginning. Like in a way, you get to experience a closer relationship to that universal mind. And so you get, in order to comprehend what you're feeling and grasping and experiencing from it, it shows up as thought, because that's the only way we can understand anything. But it feels like it's fresher. It's more of that world, not your little head world.
I've got a slightly different view, because sometimes, like especially if it's a very transcendent or mystical experience to some degree, and there isn't really thought or words to describe it, but you can kind of shift from like an acceptance that you'll never understand it analytically, but it can be a felt known experience that no one has to try convince you. But like I think I know, maybe that could just be the ego.
No, I really like that you made that distinction, that sometimes you're never going to understand it through thought. I think that's absolutely true, and I've gained a much deeper respect for that in the last 5 years. Just that sometimes there's knowledge, knowing, feeling, understanding that comes via something else, like through this kind of ethereal, or just through, it's almost like a body knowing or a soul knowing. It's not that your thoughts get it.
Do you have any experiences in your past that you've kind of experienced something like that?
Yeah, I've had a few. I think the more recent one was 4 years ago. My brother's wife and two small children were killed by a suicidal motorist, guy who was trying to
Wow.
kill himself by running his car into another car. And in bizarre twist of fate, he survived, but my sister-in-law and my niece and nephew died. And
Oh, sorry.
my sister-in-law and I were extremely close. So she was my good friend before she and my brother even started dating. And their daughter was 2.5 at the time, and their son was 4 months old. And I had just given birth to my first child, who was 1 month old when this happened. So that was this massive trauma. I'd never experienced loss, grief, trauma of that magnitude before in my life. And there was really something poignant for me about it happening right as I had just entered motherhood. I think you're in a really interesting state of consciousness after you give birth for the first time. You're really expanded, you're really open, you're really humble, you're kind of in this beautifully both foreign but known land, because it's in your biology, it's in your spiritual knowing to be a mother, but you're very much in this unknown space. So I was like in this unknown space of being a brand new mom, and then suddenly thrust into this other unknown space of really unexpectedly losing these 3 beautiful people tragically.
Yeah.
So that put me, all I can say is I just remember feeling this overwhelming sense that like my thoughts, my ego had been blown up. Like they didn't exist. And I just kept feeling this feeling of, I know nothing. I know nothing. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just like, I would wake up every day, I was just like walking around in this feeling of like, I know nothing. And at a certain point, well, first I'll just say that there was part of that that was profoundly beautiful, and it was really disorienting to be in what many people thought of as this like horrible, hard, tragic experience. But actually my personal experience of it was quite magical. Like I actually loved it.
There's that movie, Collateral Beauty with Will Smith. It's not the best movie, but when someone passes, the lady in the movie says, "Don't forget to see the collateral beauty," because there is always like it's hard to acknowledge that side. I've experienced it with both my parents passing from cancer, but there's something like I don't know how to put words to it. There's something.
I like that phrase.
Tragic and sad.
Collateral beauty.
Yeah.
I talked about it as the magic of grief, because I really felt like something about that space was quite magical, because most of your life you walk around very much knowing, not in an arrogant way, but like you kind of know, you wake up and you know what you need to do, and you know more or less what your day is going to look like. You probably have a calendar, or at least a mental one. And so it's very like your life is very, you know, with mild variation, is more or less understood, predictable. You kind of have your head wrapped around it. Even those of us that maybe feel scatterbrained, it's like you still kind of know what each day is more or less about. And the experience of becoming a mom and then losing my sister and her 2 kids, it was like that went away. I just had this wild feeling of I know nothing, and yet the magic part that immediately caught me, it was like this invisible net that was there just beyond the feeling of I know nothing, was life's got you. Like that mind, that intelligence that we were talking about before is like going to show you what to do. You don't need to know, Mara. You don't need to know. You don't need to know how to do this. You don't need to know how to help your brother navigate the most awful, horrific thing that can happen to you. You don't need to know how to be a mom. Like, life is designed, the intelligence of mind is just going to show you the way. So just let it. And it was like, it literally felt like this invisible hand of God just comes and grabs you and says, well, here, go there. So it was like, I would have the nudge, breastfeed your baby. So I'd feed my baby. I'd have the nudge, go crawl in bed with your brother and just hold him. And it was like, my whole existence for the span of a couple months was just following these nudges of life, because my brain was like completely not capable of wrapping my head around what the fuck had just happened. So that was one. And I will say also that that journey opened my mind to breath work, which I'd never done before. Because I had been in a world of talking to people about the mind and thoughts, but it had all been very talk-based. But when this happened, I had zero desire to talk. It was like, there's nothing for me to say here. Like, it just, no word felt valuable, you know? So I started doing these breathwork things. This was also, by the way, during COVID, which is another fun sprinkled addition to this time in my life. But so I'm like isolated in my house doing all of it, dealing with all this. But I did these online breath workshops and had wildly profound experiences of, all I can say is sort of body-based shifts in consciousness.
Like a trauma release, It's very... I've done a few different ones. I did a holotropic breathwork with a group of maybe like 8 people once. And I think we did the holotropic breathwork for maybe an hour and a half. And, you know, it was like 6 to 8 men, like crying their eyes out, like having these specific things you didn't even know was a thing, like come up in your body and be released. But yeah, the grief is it's a hard one to sit through, and it's a hard one to, I think, if you're, because your heart's obviously going to feel pain and grief, but like your thoughts, and especially compulsive, repetitive thoughts, can be like, it can make grief so much harder. And I've seen that with my gran in many ways. It feels like she is stuck in a loop of the same thoughts around stuff. And I wasn't kind of planning on the podcast to sway this way, but I did after my mom passed from cancer, and that was like a very hard experience because she went through like a whole sort of mental breakdown where she didn't really know who and what she was, and it's a whole another story. But after she passed, I went, and I'd always for years had heard of ayahuasca, and I'd always wanted to do it, and I went and did a ceremony. And it might sound like the most ridiculous story, but anyway, like the realm I sort of experienced was so spiritual, and it had a complete ineffable component to it, but it also had a real component. And there was this innate knowing, or like an innate feeling that I've been here before. The only way I've been here before is if I've died before, which means it's all going to be okay. Which I don't know. It's a bit of a leap, but yeah, like that for me was very comforting. Like it didn't mean I didn't feel sadness or pain or loss, but there was like it will be okay, you know. It might take time.
No, I did not go and do ayahuasca, but I felt drawn to, and my brother and I have talked about this a lot, my brother who lost his wife and kids, that, your intellect comes in and says, am I just grasping onto these ideas because I'm grieving? Like, is this just what grieving people do? And we've helped each other to both tell those thoughts to fuck off, because they're not really, it's almost neither here nor there. Is you're either open to exploring that there's more beyond what your head has considered up until this point or not, and then kind of seeing what you see from there. But my brother had a very strong experience of that as well, and some sort of healing work that he did after, both plant medicine based and not. But that same feeling of, oh, I've been here before, and I've been here with Vanessa, his past wife, before. And I don't know the link. I don't know how to connect it to what we were talking about before, but there's something about recognizing that intelligence is not confined to time and lifespan in the way we're normally trained as humans to think about. And there is something pretty amazing about realizing, like, oh, that's a construct I've been living in. That's not actually fact. There's something much bigger and more expansive that's playing out over multiple lifetimes, maybe on multiple planes. Like, and to your point, it's like, it's not something I can even talk about through my, like right now I'm in my normal mind trying to talk about it. It's just something that when you have a feeling of knowing it, it's known. Not intellectually known, it's just known. You just know it.
Yeah, it's a felt experience. It's also something I don't feel I need to prove to anyone. And I don't feel like I need convincing about stuff. Not that I'm like closed off to any conversation or theory or something. So I mean, maybe we can back up a little bit and speak about some of the principles that you guys teach, and maybe go into what work you guys do.
Well, so it's interesting because that has evolved a lot since I saw you last in Chicago, which was what, 2017?
I think so. Yeah.
So my background was in kind of a, I don't even know what the right word is, but sort of a psycho-spiritual approach called the 3 Principles that describes the human experience as coming from these universal forces like mind, thought, and consciousness, that there's not a human on the planet that doesn't experience the symphony of life via these universal forces that are going on in us, that I am conscious, I have awareness, and what I am feeling and made aware of can come to me individually through thought. So like if I have the thought, oh, I'm really uncomfortable in this room, I can tell everybody hates me, I feel that in my body. I feel it, conscious reality in that moment, whether it is or not, because my thinking is connected to my consciousness and I feel that is real. And it's this incredibly compelling sort of special effects department that every human is walking around with. But that beyond that is this universal mind, this innate intelligence that's always informing us, always in a way trying to help us, heal us, just like that shark, just like every other system in your body. It's plugged in. So that was my background, my training, and I found that pointing humans in that direction, that there's this like very invisible, but also at the same time totally visible, and that it shows up in your life way to understand what the hell is happening to all of us. And that if you can look internally as opposed to externally, is incredibly helpful, and it clears up a lot of misunderstandings, unnecessary suffering, and conflict in life. Like, I And for the first 15 years of my career, all I did was talk to people about these principles and that that's the source of their experience, and that the more they understand that, the easier.
And do you think for many people they've never grasped or had the insight to kind of look within? Do you think there's like a shift taking place towards, because it certainly seems like if I speak to my girlfriend's younger sisters, they seem more open-minded and informed about this sort of stuff than like my parents or the older generation.
100%. Yeah. I think, and again, because, that innate intelligence is driving us toward healing all the time. Like we see that on a physical level. If we get a cut, it heals. It's like, I think that's kind of on the macro over a much larger time frame. What's happening with kind of the human psyche and soul is we have some wounds, but they're healing. And one of those ways of healing is that collectively humans are starting to look within more, because we had a sort of a period of time where we were living very externally focused, and it created a lot of inequality, division, suffering, and we're now trying to heal from that. So it's like it's harder to pinpoint and see when it's a sort of collective emotional, spiritual, philosophical process, but I think it's very much the same as kind of what happens with an individual who has a wound in their body.
Yeah, as like the macro and the micro.
So.
But yeah, I also feel like one plus side of COVID was I think a lot of people were forced to look internally, because for some, it wasn't always a positive experience for people, but I think that at the same time, like that discomfort and sitting with your thoughts and observing them, like just to sidetrack, I did a silent hike not too long ago, and it was one of the first things where I'd spent 24 hours in silence. I was filming this guy, I just did a podcast with him, but he trains all these people and they do this blindfolded hike to these caves, and it's all in silence. But it was very fascinating to just be able to witness not only the thoughts, but how many were repeated maybe, or like a compulsive thought, or a looping thought. And it's, like I know earlier you touched on also the energy of thought. So maybe we can touch on, because I've certainly felt it, like if you're in a negative thought headspace, it is not only mentally draining, it's physically draining.
100%.
It's physically depriving you of life force energy.
Yeah. I think every single thought that we have has a biochemical effect in our body, and over time that compounds, which is why when people finally have a big insight, or let's say really forgive someone or something from their past, it's like this insane weight. And that's so fascinating, because it points to what's impossible to prove, but that basically we give thought matter. So when something matters to us, it creates mass in our experience. It creates matter in our body. Like if I have an angry thought over and over and over again for 15 years, like that's affecting my biochemistry. So it's having an effect on the matter in my body. But it's not that.
It's also something you can feel in a room. Like someone who's been angry their whole life, and that person walks in the room, you can feel it. Like
they don't have to say anything
on a body level.
Yeah, it's wild.
It's not just like a facial expression, although it helps. But so.
And I think when you talk about like what happened during COVID, or what you experience on a silent hike, I think one of the most magnificent gifts that universal mind or intelligence shows us in those moments is that all we have to do really is, I'm sorry, but this is how it kind of is, like, shut the fuck up. Just shut the fuck up for a little bit. And it's really hard to do when we've created a culture and a society and a kind of collective pattern of doing and going and being and striving. And, so it's like we get currently culturally trained into being on all the time, as if that's what's going to take care of us in life, as if that's the key to success or survival or whatever. And yet every human, whether it was through COVID or going on a long hike in nature or losing loved ones and having, your life just go on halt for a second, it's like you instantly realize that just underneath that desperate, constant busyness of our minds is this much deeper, much calmer, more secure intelligence that's like, I got that, you got that, we got that. But you can only feel that if you shut the fuck up.
Yeah. I think for me, it seems like a growing problem in modern society. It's not only the compulsive thoughts, but maybe like the compulsion to project every thought you have. And that seems to be like, I mean, specifically with like social media and online stuff, it's almost like there's now a space to voice every worst thought you've ever had as an anonymous person, or put it on stage and stuff. But it's almost like an over-identification with like every compulsive thought in some level.
An over-identification with every compulsive thought. I think you just hit the nail on the head of what kind of the greatest challenge of our time is.
Yeah.
And I think it used to be like,
good.
I remember when I first learned this, I was sort of looked back at my education and my bringing up in this world, which was very much about like the older you got, the more emphasis was placed on being smart, proving you were smart, demonstrating that through raising your hand and speaking in class or writing things in papers. It was very much about like, can I prove that my thinking is so great? And if I can get an A. And if I get an A, then I can go and get a good job. It's like the whole system is set up to say, show that your thinking is so amazing so that you can get these things. Now, I didn't even have social media in that mix. Social media kind of exploded right after I graduated from college. And I'm like, oh my God, if you add social media to that same sort of setup or direction, it's like it just explodes this idea that your thinking is superior. And the more you can prove your thinking is superior, the better your life is going to be. And it's like, no, we need to go in the opposite direction.
But it's also with social media, you can now prove your thoughts are right or more superior than others more than ever, because you just don't have to listen to other voices that might conflict with you, or it's like that. Yeah, like in many ways, like the capability to actually listen has like been lost. Not lost, but taken a bit of a backseat. It's definitely like cultural. Like if I whenever I've traveled to America, like in certain places, I can feel that like a lot more. There's like a need to tell me something.
Totally. Very work. Well, and to go back to what we were talking about a moment ago, is that's what's really shifted for me in the last 4 or 5 years since I saw you, is I realized that talking to people about the internal nature of life and where our experience comes from, even that had become too much of like my own thought system, my own thought system about the principles behind life. Like,
yeah.
And I didn't like that. It was like there was something too formulated about it, too rigid, too arrogant. And it didn't allow for more of what we're talking about the beginning of this podcast, of kind of this like ineffable, you can't really explain it, that there is, I say you can't really explain it and then I go quiet. You can't explain it, but it's like there are these experiences in life that show you there is something so much bigger. And I know for me, coming to Chicago, working with people from very diverse backgrounds from mine, and then also experiencing that grief like I did, I think both of those happening sort of around the same time made me just go, I don't know, and I don't want to be someone who's peddling that I know, like out there offering like, here's this thing, and if you look in this direction, you'll get helped. And at the same time, I want to be a participant in whatever way I can of facilitating more well-being and less suffering in the world. So I've had to really go through my own kind of identity crisis and journey and going, well, if I'm not, a practitioner of the 3 principles and I teach people about mind, consciousness, and thought, then how am I helping people? What does that look like? What am I putting out my shingle as? And the short version is that I'm just a human and I'm figuring it out every day new. And it requires a lot of listening and listening to the people in front of you, the experiences they've had, and how they interact with, come into contact with that ineffable, deeper truth we're talking about or trying.
Yeah. No, I mean, I witnessed it firsthand, and we should back up a bit before and just explain the work you guys were doing in Chicago. But yeah, like even if you, I think if you've got a disclaimer, like, look, I'm not saying this is absolute truth, but these are my thoughts on thoughts and consciousness. But it still opens up a dialogue in a room with people, and it's like, oh, God, he's also got ridiculous compulsive thoughts, or maybe like I don't have to pay attention to everyone, or I can't, because I remember sitting and listening to Eric, and you can see like people have the light bulb clicks, and at the end of the day, it's all perception. And even if you read someone like an exact thing word for word, they're still gonna take it and make it their own,
And we do that. Like we do go into rooms and talk about things and try to, sort of explain that this is just our take, but it's so helpful to have that conversation, to gather as humans and get interested in what's going on just under the surface, behind the curtain of life. Like anytime we go look there, it's like, interesting. Okay, hadn't seen that before. And in the work that we do in Chicago, we're having that conversation in communities that have been historically very neglected, underserved, under-resourced. And so these conversations are very refreshing and very helpful, because it's like, a big glass of water in a desert, because people have been struggling just to survive and struggling to deal with systemic racism and inequality and socioeconomic disadvantage. So these conversations, I mean, they'll just say all the time, like, we don't really talk about anything like that in our community, partly because our parents are so busy just trying to survive, working 3 jobs, something like that. And also there's just a stigma around anything to do with people's emotions, mental health. There's just this sort of like, be tough and get through life because it's fucking hard. And it's survival of the fittest out here kind of feeling. So in our work in Chicago, what we discovered is that there are these amazing dormant young people in these communities that want to contribute, that want to feel like they're part of something bigger and part of something that's helping make the lives of the people they love around them, their neighbors, their friends, their family better. But there's no one helping them see how to do that, or at least in no kind of mass or scalable way.
Like, yeah.
So during the summer, we offer a 6-week internship for 16 to 25-year-olds from Southside Chicago communities. And during that 6-week internship, we exposed them to all of the things that you and I are talking about. What is it to be human? Where is our human experience coming from? What is this amazing, profound, deeper intelligence within every single one of us? It has nothing to do with our physical bodies or our culture or our experiences or our past traumas. It's just this superpower, this innate life force. And you see, to your point, like these light bulbs go on. It's like, because they know it, they feel it, and it feels so refreshing to be connected to it. And in and amongst their peers, and then to talk about the struggles they've been through, but from that personal foundation, from that internal space of strength. And they realize very quickly how much kind of the divisiveness, the us versus them, the conflict, the violence is driven by humans not having these conversations and not entering into these spaces together. And if we did that more, we would heal. And so then those young leaders then become part of our facilitator team during the school year. So during the school year, we go into 4th through 8th grade classes in the Chicago public schools in Southside Chicago. So 4th through 8th grade is right around like 9 to 12 or 13.
Okay.
And we've kind of decided and figured out from working with 16 to 25-year-olds that they're like, if you had given me these tools, this understanding,
when you're young,
right around that age, which I think comes to what we're talking about, it's kind of like when the ego's really landing and you're really starting to dig into some of these ideas about yourself and life and what society is expecting of you. And it's like to get in there with some of this understanding and the beauty and the expansiveness of it right at that age is such a gift. It's like they're still open. There's still a lot of fertile ground to plant these seeds and watch them grow. So during the school year, what we call the young leaders are called the Rebels for Peace. And the name Rebels for Peace came from them saying this understanding allows me to rebel against a lot of the ideas that keep us violent and keep us in conflict in society. So we're rebelling against those thought systems in the name of peace.
Because, that's the thing. There are memes, like, viral ideas. Like a small idea that's very spreadable, but then people latch onto it as absolute truth. Do you ever... Has there been like a young prodigy or mini Buddha that's just like kind of understood things quite instantaneously and like helped spread it around his community?
Yeah, the initial young person that we met, which led to us forming Rebels for Peace as a youth-focused project of our nonprofit, was a young man named Dejan White. And he still works with us. We met him when he was 16 or 17. And that was back in, I think, 2016. But when we go, and so now not only do we work in schools, but we've also been invited by other cities in America to come and talk about this model and how to provide youth with the tools to be able to go share this with the next generation. And we were in Des Moines, Iowa recently, working in partnership with something called the Youth Justice Initiative. And there was a woman in the audience of the 3-day training we were doing, and she's like the senior prosecutor for the state of Iowa, and she said when she listened to Dejan, she said, the only other person I've heard talk like you is Thich Nhat Hanh. And I looked at Dejan and I could tell he had no idea who Thich Nhat Hanh was, so I had to explain. I was like, he's kind of like the Dalai Lama, like, but he just had this initial insight when we met him, 6 years ago now, 7 years ago now, where it clicked for him that the cycle of violence in his life, in his community, was not an external mandate. It was a belief system. It was a thought system. And that it had never occurred to him that that's something that stops and changes within the mind of an individual. It's not something that gets changed externally. And so now he has this amazing ability to talk to groups of people of any age, of any walk of life, and help them see that the mind is the source of change, and it's the only change that's real and sustainable. And he just has this, almost Buddha-like ability to talk about it that tends to blow people. But since then, we've now worked with a lot of young leaders. We have a whole team of people like him now. And I think there's something really special about the way young people talk about, I don't like this word, but these concepts, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Because they're very noble shit. Like, I can even tell when I'm talking to you, it's like I have my adult mind and my training and whatever kind of in the way, and don't have that. So there's something really fresh and disarming about how they talk about this stuff.
Yeah. I could only imagine in school if you were just introduced to these sorts of ideas and discussions, because no one ever spoke about, okay, do you think a lot about stuff? I've also heard that there's some people that don't have an internal dialogue. I can't believe it.
Yeah, I don't know that.
But also the weird one, I'm like, whose voice is that? I once, but yeah, the one time I watched a lot of Mr. Robot consecutively, and it was the first time I got into it. I watched the whole thing, and I think it was during COVID, and then eventually my thoughts were the Mr. Robot guy's voice, like Rami Malek, in my head, and then it was this weird thing of it's even the voice of the character in the show, and he's conspiracy and worrying about the world, and it was quite a little step back of oh wow, we are really not influenced by our surroundings hugely.
Well, really, yeah. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because my son has this one show he really likes called Trash Truck. All of a sudden he has started talking to me like the kid in Trash Truck. So up until a month ago, I was mama, and he would ask me for things in his normal Teo voice. But now the kid in Trash Truck says, "Mom," and so Teo starts calling me Mom, and I'm like, "Oh my God, you've turned into the kid from Trash Truck. We got to turn that show off."
Well, yeah, but the internal voice, it's not. I've played back a voice note of myself. It doesn't sound like the one in my head. The one in my head mumbles way less, but So what role do you think our thoughts not only shape reality and our own reality, but have I think we can directly affect matter in our bodies with our thoughts?
Yeah.
Maybe you've had a bit of an experience with that on breathwork, that also your body and a shift in your breathing can even affect your thinking. So there's a weird correlation.
I
correspondence.
Culturally, we are way untapping that potential, because I noticed, you noticed in an hour and a half holotropic breath workshop, holy shit, there's some pretty wild stuff that can happen here in the space of 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And on even smaller, simpler scale, I noticed that if I stop, let's say before I start a Zoom conversation with somebody, and I just kind of feel my body in the chair and then take a few deep breaths, I feel like a different person. And it's that took 10 seconds. And so I think about, I'm sure that they're out there. I'm not living in one, but there are cultures that's just really deeply appreciated and understood and incorporated into their daily way of being. But yeah,
Well, I think even in like China and stuff, you've got like a big Tai Chi culture where they're like incorporating the breath and movement, and like it's not something we have as like a practice everyone's involved in.
No, I know, and I think like I said, I think it's just a massively untapped resource that we're all walking around with. Is that at any moment, whether you took 5 minutes or 90 minutes or 10 days, you could be in almost a completely different environment, internal environment. Like you could completely shift your internal environment to something that is going to have cellular repercussions, that your body's going to function differently. And then you as a human are going to go out and interact with the world and create differently from that different internal environment. Like there's something so massively unappreciated going on there. I think like wars would stop on the macro scale. Environmental destruction would stop on the macro scale. But just on a micro, we'd be living in such a more kind of resonant, harmonious, in line with nature way that would just allow for health to flourish in these amazing, meat sacks, as some people call these bodies that we're
the meat puppets. So are there practices you guys like when you guys get together? Are you more having a discussion about things or bringing ideas to principles, or is there any like practices or I guess guided experiences people do, or is it all?
The short answer is we do with the young kids, which is actually really fun. We do a lot of talking and activities. Like it's very play-based with the kids, which has taught me a lot because, like I said, my kind of first 15 years of doing work in this general realm was very talk-based, like 99.9%. Now we would do listening experiences where people would get very silent and just have the experience of being in presence with another person, not listening in the way that traditional listening is, which is very busy-minded. You kind of have your own agenda, you're waiting to interject, and you have a purpose. Like this is very different. Like listening just to listen with nothing else going on in your mind and be in the presence of and absorb another person and see what happens. So there was some of that, but outside of that, it was all talk-based. What I love about working with young people is they're like, look, let's have fun because we're human and it's fun to be fun. And there's like way more creativity to how we can explore this stuff. So they play games and they do activities and they make art around things. And so it's like, it's very playful, the work we do with the kids, which I think is really cool. The idea that you can have these profound philosophical realizations through playing with Skittles, which is what we did yesterday with the kids in school. And it was like one of the most engaged, and the kids really got it. Like they understood, like they put Skittles in water and watched how different Skittles turn the water different. You imagine a 4th grade kid. At first it's like, when do I get to eat the Skittle? When do I get to eat the Skittle? And it's like, oh, glass is turning orange and that kid's glass is turning green. And at the same time, they're having this whole experience about how your thoughts color your world. That like, if you're living in anger all the time, you end up with a glass of red water because that's all you've got is red Skittles in your cup, and it's like, they got it and they loved it. And it was really cool. And it's like, yeah, you could go sit in a cave with a monk for 10 months and learn the same thing, more or less. Well, you can throw some Skittles in water with a bunch of kids and have fun.
Yeah. There's many ways to climb a mountain, but it's the same view from the top, but that's the thing. I think there's many. It seems like part of life is somehow awakening to that like there is more to. There's something behind the surface of thought.
And I think to play with
it. Like, geez, if you could get it, like the younger you can get it, I think the more smooth sailing life might be.
Totally. And I like doing different things now. Like I really enjoy yoga or meditation or breath work because it kind of like, I feel like it grabs my ankles and just grounds me. Like those practices stop me in my tracks, make me shut the fuck up, like I was saying earlier, and get in my body so that I can feel what we're talking about. But I love that, you know, you or I can have a conversation on a podcast and maybe that's what helps someone have a realization, or a kid looks at a glass of Skittles and has a realization, or like, I'm very, I guess, encouraging of humans to not have rigidity in their thinking about how this stuff can be understood, because on the one hand, it's super simple and ordinary, and it's playful, and it's beautiful, and it's profound, and it's sensual, and it's like, it's all of the things. So why not go explore and understand it through all of those ways?
Yeah, I think not the difference, but, you know, with yoga, breathwork, meditation, you aren't passively listening. There's like a bit of commitment and action from your side. It's something like, if you want to witness a longer space of silence between thoughts, I would say do 30 minutes of breathwork. And like, as you go through your rounds, like every time I do it, there's such a reluctance. I hate the first round. I'm thinking so much. Then I do it again. It's a little bit better. I'm like, oh, okay, that was actually quite nice. And then by like the fourth or fifth round, it's like, ooh, my whole body's vibrating. And there's like this witness experience happening. And every time I swear I'm going to do it more often.
I don't reach there.
It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of effort to breathe intensely, and like, I guess that's also part of the struggle. I think maybe with meditating, like there's, I think for a lot of people, they're trying to fight not having thoughts. And, you know, it's not it. You can like pull yourself back from the thoughts. I think you guys used to speak about it, like let it kind of flow through. Something like that, I remember.
And I think it's such a human mistake to make. Is very innocent, but it's like we're very polarized often in our thinking. It's like, oh, I'm going to meditate so that I can stop my thinking and feel good. And it's like, no.
Yeah. There's an outcome,
it's a much grayer area than that. Like, you're going to have a different relationship to your thinking, maybe feel better, maybe feel worse. Like, not to have so much of that kind of ego temptation and make it about an agenda and that it's supposed to look like a certain way. I think, and grief taught me this. It's like, oh, it's so not black and white. Like, you can be in a flood of really, really bad negative feelings of just missing a person or feeling wronged, thinking life is so awful, and at the same time feel really grateful. It's not like I had to learn that, like, oh, life isn't polarities. It's like it's all this like ocean of things churning, and if you just allow it to churn, that deeper mind we're talking about is carrying you somehow in some direction, whatever way that it does. So I think like if we approached meditation like that, like, oh, it's just going to be this ocean-like churning experience, whatever it is. Sometimes it'll be really beautiful and sometimes it might be really annoying, and you'll just find that you hate yourself during it.
I think it's like back to that awareness sort of thing, because if you do meditate and you cannot get to a still place, your thoughts are frantic, all of a sudden there's like an awareness of like, oh, you know, today might be a tough day. You know, like or a tougher day than usual, but there's like a witness or awareness behind all that.
I learned something after having kids, which really helped me, and it's like a good metaphor for what we're talking about, is you don't get a lot of sleep when you have 2 kids under 2, or you still don't get a lot of sleep when you have a 4 and a 2-year-old. My 2-year-old's still getting up multiple times a night, but I used to get very frantic about like, oh, the baby's napping. I need to lay down and take a nap right now because I'm exhausted But what if she wakes up? And you
Yeah.
never know. Like sometimes a baby sleeps 20 minutes, sometimes they sleep 2 hours. But if you're laying there trying to get sleep, you won't sleep.
You
And
can't.
it's really stressful and you end up feeling worse after, not better. So I can't remember if I read somewhere, I just figured it out. It's like, don't try to sleep, just rest. Just lay down, close your eyes and be still. And if sleep happens to you, great. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. And that was like game changer for me. It was like, oh, laying down with my eyes closed is good enough. It's good enough.
Yeah.
But this
and
idea that like sleep is better and you need sleep it was
Yeah.
haunting me and I couldn't get it, you know? So it's like, I feel that way about this realm. It's like, just put yourself at the bus stop for reflection, insight, quiet to visit you. And if it shows up, great, get on the bus. And if it doesn't, oh well, at least you're on the bench, you know, you're waiting. Maybe it'll be there, maybe it won't. And you might end up just having a really nice sit on the bench, and that's fine.
Yeah, I think like that the yin and yang principle, I think we in a far too yang approach where everything has to be done in external, and it is balancing with practices of like I need to slow down, but it's hard, like, and like everything's getting faster, everyone wants stuff quicker. Like it's very hard to, in a workspace or work environment and life and getting to and from work and exercise and walk your dogs, or never mind kids, I can't even imagine, but to like you know, like get that time to be at the bus stop, as you said.
Right. And it's funny because on that note, I actually have another call in 1 minute, so I'm going to have to wrap up. But
No, that's perfect.
But I do
gonna
think
say.
that's part of the cultural revolution that's going to need to have to happen. You know, and that doesn't feel so hard to people because it's not a sustainable way to exist. I don't think.
No, but we do it anyway.
But we carry on.
Okay, Gara. Yeah, well, thank you so much for taking your time to be on the podcast and chatting. Like, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's always a
Thanks.
pleasure. I love connecting with you, and anytime we can do stuff together, play in this realm and game, I love it.
Thanks. Have a good meeting.
All right, yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mara.
Gary.
Okay.